Hey everyone, Brad here, and I'm really excited to do our first question and answer video. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions for this week. We're going to jump right in and see what we got. First question, why do I wear toe shoes? Awesome question. I specifically wear Vibram or Vibram 5 fingers, and the main reason I do this is because of increased ground feel and increased proprioception. So all movement and all activity that we do starts with our feet. That's how we connect and move throughout this world. So adding a lot of padding and distance between your feet and the ground just kind of disrupts that feedback system. So I want to feel what's actually happening beneath my feet, and my ankles and feet are going to adjust accordingly, and that's going to lead up the chain to improve my movement mechanics and just help me understand from an injury prevention standpoint, what are my ankles doing? How are my feet reacting with the ground? And by fixing that, I'm going to improve my quality of movement. The other reason is simply to build up my foot strength. So a lot of people have, or say they have flat feet, and that's kind of like a condition or something they were born with. Really, you can build up your arch through good barefoot or minimalist shoe activity. So I like to work the muscles of my feet and give them that opportunity to work the way they were designed to, because again, that's going to build up that it's going to build up that resilience. It's going to build up that good suspension, solid foundation for all movement. Good question. Thanks for asking. Next, this is from one of my small group clients. Why is the glute medius so important? So why am I, as a trainer, always harping on getting the glutes to fire and the glutes to activate? The main reason I do this is because the glutes are heavily involved in pelvic stability. And so many people, the main problems people have when it comes to injuries are knee pain, lower back pain, or hip, like sciatic type pain. And a lot of those things can be tied back to inactive glutes or glutes that are not strong enough for what they're doing. And because so many people these days sit all the time and live in a sedentary lifestyle, their glutes are shutting off because we're just squishing them all day in seated positions. They never get a chance to work. And over time, other muscles are going to kind of take up the role of the glute, and that can cause some issues and injuries and nagging pain down the line. So one of my big roles is assessing the function of the glute, and then how can we build that back up? And a couple of the easy ways to do it are just single leg work. So with a slightly bent knee and a slightly hinged hip, doing things like RDLs or even just resisting movement in that position can help wake the glutes up. Also doing some sort of band work like monster walks or band walks, that sort of thing can absolutely help as well. There are some more specific kind of rehab type exercises that's needed, but the main role of the glute is to stabilize that pelvis so that we can actually keep things solid as we're shifting from one foot to the other. Good question, thank you. Okay, the next question we have is, can weightlifters do keto? And by weightlifting, you means powerlifters or Olympic lifters. Will it affect being explosive? Great question. And the best way to go about explaining this is talking about the 3 energy systems. So the human body can run on 3 different types of fuel, and they're used at different times or intensities. So the oxidative system is where we burn fat, and this is what we spend most of our time utilizing, and most kind of idle, low to even moderate level energy expenditure is going to be burning fat. Next, we have glycolysis, or the carbohydrate burning system, and this is used for periods of high intensity or moderate intensity lasting like 90 minutes, thereabouts. So this is where you run into kind of a normal workout, so a 60-minute to an hour-and-a-half workout, any sort of intense kind of sprint work, any sort of cycling or medium range endurance stuff is going to rely on carbohydrate. And then the final system is creatine. And this is used for our most explosive type activities. So this lasts about 6 seconds or less. So anytime you're doing quick, explosive, powerful work, you're probably relying on the creatine phosphate system. And you can see even with football players, an average football play lasts about 6 seconds. So they start out by relying on the creatine phosphate system, but that ends up shifting over play after play into more of a carbohydrate-based system. So I would say if you're like an Olympic lifter or a power lifter, keto's not going to affect too much competition-wise, because you're going to be relying on that creatine phosphate system, and then you'll be giving yourself 5 minutes, maybe even 10 minutes to kind of recover in between and reboot those creatine stores for the next rep. It's when you're doing more repeat effort, repeat explosiveness stuff that carbohydrate can become a little more important. And this is why you see people in marathons and triathlons kind of refueling with carbohydrate gels every 60 to 90 minutes. And that's because their carbohydrate stores are running out. So people on a ketogenic diet can become a little more efficient at burning fat. So they can burn fat at a little higher intensities, but in general, depending on the type of exercise you're doing, you might have to up your protein, or not your protein, up your carbohydrate intake in those situations where you're going to be doing moderate to high intensity activity for longer than about 60 to 90 minutes. The other thing to think about here is, even if you are eating a ketogenic diet, there's some carbohydrate intake with that. And so time your carbohydrate intake around the periods you're going to be most active. So if you think about carbs being used during intense or prolonged activity, you don't need to be eating carbs if you're not going to be doing that. I think that's why keto is so effective for so many people in America especially, is because in general, we're not that active, but we're still eating a carbohydrate-based diet. So by switching away from carbohydrates, which are useful when we're active, and relying more on fats, we're actually tapping into the fat stores that we have on our body. Hope that answers the question. Thanks. All right, next one. What are popular exercises that are the least effective, and what are their alternatives? This is from the.wobble. Thanks for asking this on Instagram. And instead of talking all day about the types of exercises or the specific kind of cables versus this and this versus that, here are the principles that I usually follow to get the best bang for your buck in terms of exercise. The things I would tend to avoid are machine-based, muscle-based, and isolated type exercises. So machines have a time and they have a place to be used, especially if you're recovering from injury or really working on specific isolated muscle work, which there are some times to do that. That's when they can be useful. But instead of machines, I prefer any sort of free weight or body-based movement. And this is talking about barbells, kettlebells, dumbbells, bands, gymnastics rings, absolutely. Things like that actually require a little more integration of the body, definitely a lot more stability of the body, and a little more nervous system connection, or that mind-body connection. So you can work on a machine and really check out and not have to do anything. But I think by working with a barbell, your body is constantly having to adjust and stabilize and react to that weight in a way that just builds the mind-body connection, which translates to a little more functional movement down the road. So the next would be muscle-based versus movement-based. So many people focus on going into the gym and doing like a back and bis or a chest and tris type day. I want to focus less on that and more on what are the movements that the human body should be capable of doing, and how can those movements translate to real activity and to our quality of life. So instead of focusing on individual muscles, which we don't do, I want to focus on squatting, hinging, pushing, pulling, and carrying. And these are the basic building blocks of any athletic movement. So I want to focus on strengthening those and learning how to do those correctly so that they will translate to real world movement and real world situations. And that's the whole basis of my fitness philosophy, because no matter how many bicep curls you do, you rarely bicep curl something in the real world. You're using an integrated system, so we should train it in an integrated way. That leads into my last point about isolation versus compound or integrated work. The more you can train the body to work as one unit or work in one piece, I think the better benefit you're going to get out of that, because the body only works in single muscles in a gym setting or in a vacuum. Anytime you actually have to rely on your physical fitness, you're going to be relying on movements, not just how strong a single muscle is or how a single muscle looks. Great question. I actually wrote a blog post about this on my website, adventureathletefit.com, and the post is called Hero's Journey, an Introduction to Fundamental Movement. This will kind of go a little deeper into what we just talked about. All right, next question we have from a bodybuilding client of mine. What are the hang-ups of doing a routine that is push on one day, pull on the other day, and legs on the third day? Right off the bat, I'd say I don't have really any hang-ups with this. This is a decent approach, and going back to the previous question, it's more or less a movement-based approach, right? So you could also say this is a chest and tri day, a back and bi day, and a leg day, but you're framing it under pushing, pulling, and then legs could either be squatting or hinging. So I think this is a great approach. The only time you would maybe reserve this kind of approach is if you're dealing with beginner athletes. And I think beginner athletes and beginner fitness enthusiasts get a good response and good adaptation from full body programs. So going back again to my previous question, working one exercise in each of the 5 fundamental movements is going to help teach the body how to work together, teach the muscles how to respond to the nervous system, and just kind of reinforce those good movement patterns. So I think for beginning out, you might want to do a full body workout and maybe repeat that workout 2 or 3 times a week, so you don't have to change the exercises too much. As you become more of an elite level athlete, and as your body gets used to the demands of weightlifting and exercise a little more, that's when you need to start switching things up and changing how you're fitting that exercise into your week. And that's where the push-pull legs comes in. So after a certain amount of time, in order to experience growth, you're going to want to add a little more fatigue into a certain movement or certain muscle group at a period, in one period of time, and then focus on something else. So instead of doing 10 or 30 push-ups 3 times a week, you might do push-ups and then a set of flies and then an overhead press. And all 3 of those in one workout are really taxing and fatiguing that muscle and contributing to a change. The exception with that is giving it enough time, right? Or the stipulation with that, rather, is giving it enough time to recover. Instead of spreading your pushing out throughout the week, you're getting it all in one day. And that's going to create potentially better adaptation, but it's going to require more rest in between. So the push-pull legs, I think, is a great way to do that. All right, and now we're on to our last question. This one comes from an old workout buddy and a really good friend of mine, Doug. He asked, how did I get such a big chest? But I'm going to switch that question to, how do you build or grow your chest muscles? And I think this is an awesome question, especially in light of what we've been talking about. So you can still have a movement-based approach, but be focusing on hypertrophy. So even though you're not focusing on a single bicep or pec muscle day, you can still be interested in improving the aesthetics of your body, or for performance sake, improving hypertrophy. The two things that I focus on in my approach is one, tension. So the more you increase tension, the more hypertrophy is going to happen. And that's kind of an age-old principle, right? So time under tension with the muscle. I like doing this in terms of tempo. So focusing on, let's say we're doing a one-arm bench press, focusing on a 3 to 4 second eccentric, a 2-second isometric contraction. And this is important because an isometric hold or contraction is not just stopping the weight. It's actively pushing up against the weight, but without any movement. So you're basically acting like there's a weight that's too heavy for you to budge. You're still going to sit there and push against it for about 2 seconds, and then you can fire back to the start through that concentric movement. So think about one rep that takes 3 to 4 seconds down, 2 seconds holding, and then maybe 2 seconds to the return is going to be anywhere from like 8 to 10 seconds. And you do that 5 or 6 or 8 times, and you're going to be getting over a minute's worth of tension in that muscle. So that is a massive component to gaining mass and hypertrophy in whatever muscle group you choose. And I would say in order to remain heavy with that, because that's very demanding, stick within 5 to 8 reps. So whether you're doing 5x5 or 3x8 or kind of any sort of realm, a rep range around that, you're going to be able to still maintain or even gain a little bit of strength, but be working on mass at the same time. And then the other point that I think about in terms of hypertrophy is reducing stability. So the more challenging the exercise is for your muscles, the harder it's going to be, and the more adaptation's going to happen, right? So if I'm working on a ring push-up rather than a barbell bench press, that ring push-up is going to require a lot more stability, a lot more tension, forced tension in the muscle, and that's going to create just more muscle per rep, right? So I think that's a good way to gain a little extra activation, little extra fatigue and tension in the muscle. So the next time you're trying to build the chest, think outside the box a little bit in terms of how can you change up a bench press or dumbbell fly or pec deck or something like that for exercises that require a little more stability. And an interesting way to do this could be a superset even. So maybe you're going a heavy 5 on bench press with a barbell, and then immediately after that you are setting the weight down, going right over and doing a push-up position plank on a stability ball. And then during that, you're still squeezing the pecs together, keeping the shoulders packed, but now you're holding for an extra 30 seconds right after that bench press. That's going to create so much tension and required stability and fatigue in that chest that you're going to see some growth from that. All right, everyone, that's it for today. Thanks again to everyone who submitted a question. We're going to do this again, so start thinking, and you don't have to wait for me to ask. Anytime a question comes up, leave a comment, shoot me an email, check out my website at adventureathletefit.com. Thanks.